Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Today we are just going to have a mop-up of NCERT 10th class diagram. This is a hard diagram. I'm just going to explain you some extra points. You can just note down. You can have some clarification of the doubts, and also it can also help you for just a mop-up before an exam. So we're right through going to start off with the explanation. So first thing, let's go through the vena cava, right? So it's the vena cava from the lower body. It's what is mentioned. So what is it? So the blood collected from the lower parts of the body are collected. The deoxygenated blood collected from the lower parts of the body enter into this vena cava, right? And the other names for this vena cava is the inferior vena cava inferior. It's inside, right? Like that. You get it, right? This is upper, so that's called the superior, and this is called the inferior. So right now, stick to this. So this is called the inferior vena cava, right? IVC, inferior vena cava, and the other name for this is called the post-caval vena cava, PCVC. Just write in short forms. Post-caval vena cava. So this is the extra information. So then the blood enters the right atrium and directly flows into during the relaxation, and it flows into the right ventricle, right? Right ventricle. So in the right ventricle, it flows into the right ventricle. Before that, I will just tell you a small extra point where this is called the AV septum, atrioventricular septum, between atria and ventrium, right? Right atrioventricular septum, right AV septum. So here you have a tricuspid valve. There's a valve which goes, there are three divisions, so it's called a tricuspid valve. So the blood flows in to the right ventricle, and then due to the contraction, or I would say the systole is mainly the contraction, and diastole is mainly the relaxation, right? So during the systole, the blood in the right ventricle goes through the pulmonary arteries, right? Goes to the pulmonary arteries. You can see the red marks here, goes to the pulmonary arteries. But before that, let me just explain you about the right ventricle. Right ventricle, you can just see the papillary muscles here. There are papillary muscles. It's somewhere in a triangle shape. It's not mentioned here. There's an extra point again. It's papillary muscles. There are about 5 papillary muscles. There's one more here. There's one more here, but that's extra. That's extra. So coming to sticking to this diagram, there are papillary muscles which hold. It's you can see thread-like structures, right? These are called cordia tendae, right? It's called cordia tendae. It's again, it just prevents the backflow of the blood in the ventricle to go, like it prevents to go backflow, right? So then, continuing with our story, the pulmonary arteries, there are two ways. There are like a number of ways. We all know that. So just sticking to the 10 grade syllabus. Then there's pulmonary arteries. Where do these lead to? You know the answer, right? It goes to the lungs. It travels, goes to the lungs. Let me just draw like that. Ultimately reaches to the lungs, right? It goes to the lungs. And this is artery, the only artery which carries the deoxygenated blood. Arteries generally carry oxygenated blood, but here this is the only exception for deoxygenated blood. But the main mechanism of arteries is not called deoxygenated or oxygenated. When they ask you the main difference between arteries and veins, just put this point throughout. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood towards the heart. This is the ultimate difference between arteries and veins without any exception. And then you can put the second point, be like, generally, arteries carry oxygenated blood, and then veins carry deoxygenated blood. There's an exception, pulmonary circulation. You can just write exception of a pulmonary circulation. There are two circulations. The lower circulations, this is called systematic circulation. The upper circulation, when it goes to the lungs, is called the pulmonary circulation, right? Here. So after leaving the story apart, coming back to the diagram, from lungs, the blood gets oxygenated. The O2 goes in, right? You studied in the other chapter. You studied in the previous part of the chapter, right? O2, oxygen enters and oxygenates the blood, right? It oxygenates the blood. So the oxygenated blood or the pure blood, but there's nothing called as pure or impure, just a reference point. So oxygenated blood just goes through and comes and lands where? Pulmonary veins. So again, pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood. That's an exception. So we all know that. So then it comes to the left atrium. The left atrium, right? In the contraction, when the heart contracts, when it's a diastole, when it just relaxes, diastole, the blood enters passively, right? And then when the systole, blood pumps and contracts, the blood forcibly goes to everywhere, right? So when the heart relaxes, the blood comes in to the right atrium, and there's a small contraction in the right atrium, which passes the blood to left ventricle. You can just take an extra point here. About 30% of the blood passively flows due to gravitational force, just due to gravity, just flows off. The remaining 30%, 70% is just by the contraction, but that's just an extra information, so take it apart. So once it goes to the left atrium, it passes to the left ventricle. Same story here. Papillary muscles, cornea tendae, same story. We've seen in the right atrium, but there's one more twist here. Here, this valve, AV septum valve, here this time it's not tricuspid, it's bicuspid. There are two divisions, so it's called bi. Bi is two, right? We all know that. Tri is three. So three divisions, tricuspid, bicuspid, and this is also called as mitral valve. Mitral valve. That's just the other name. It's just an extra information again. So then here, the blood passes to the aorta, whatever. So blood passes to the aorta with a systole of left ventricle. It passes to the aorta, right? And then let me do an extension of aorta here. That's the climax of this story. Just an extra point here. There's an extension of aorta, but this aorta descends down. It goes down like this. It goes behind. We say, in medical terms, if I would explain you, if this would be the dorsal aorta, descending aorta. But that's just an extra information. This is that you can just call it descending, ascending. You people know that. So descending aorta. The blood goes through that. Now you may be imagining, where does the blood travel up to our brains, to our upper thorax, right? But there's a small thing here. There you may be seeing in many heart diagrams. There are three arteries. One is called the brachio subclavian artery. There's left carotid artery. This left carotid artery. There's this left subclavian artery. So that's just extra information again. This is called an arc. We call this an atrial arc, aortic arc. It's an arc. We just got the aortic arc. And then uh, these are the main points. Got to remember, right? And oh yeah, coming to the septums. So right here, can you adjust the green color? This is called atrioseptum, dividing two atriums, right? Atrioseptum. This thicker one is called, what is it called? Ventricle septum. Ventricle septum. So one thing you may be noticing, you people may be noticing that this left side of the ventricle is much thicker than the right side of the ventricle. Reason? Reason is basically very simple. the right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs. Lungs is like a lower distance, it's just near to the heart, right? Lungs, the heart is located between the lungs, right? We all know that. So it's just a short way and doesn't need so much power to pump it. So, but on the other hand, the left ventricle should pump the body to all over the body, right? All over the body. So it needs thick muscle to contract with higher force, right? So it's much thicker this side. So it's much thicker this side. You can see. So then So, th there's in dividing wall, atrial septum. I guess I covered the maximum part of it, and I could give you some extra points too. Well, if you ask me on another extra point, you can just see here there are two extensions, right? When I'm marking in blue, right here, you can see that where the pulmonary artery and the aorta, right here, when I'm marking the blue color. Here, the reason to put that this is something called as semilunar valve. Something called as semi-lunar valve. It's in the lunar shape, you've seen the lunar moon, right? So it's just like a small curve. It's called the semi-lunar valve. Here also we have semi-lunar valve. Here this is called the aortic semi-lunar valve, and this is called the semi-lunar valve. We just call as an AV septum. So that's an maximum extra points I can give. There's still 100 points. If you would note that, you would come to 11th next year. If you're taking biology, you get to know more extra points. But for now, I guess this is enough. So we'll meet you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more videos.